A champion is bred from hard times, scarred mind standing on the ledge. The squad grind all time, victory in spite of opposition. Welcome to competition. You pick a side, I pick a side, they pick a side. Take a knee against abuse, they rather you die. Pushing through dark tunnels, trying to shed light. The fight is on the moment we enter the game of life. Get it right before the whole thing gone dead. Let's go ahead and take it there. Meet me on the edge.
Okay, I promised you that as Moses Malone said, we were going to be all about that action. And and I'm thrilled to have with us somebody who is all about that action, the outgoing executive director of the NFL Players Association, Demaurice Smith. How you doing, sir?
Good to see you, my friend.
I got to ask, it's the question that presidents always start the State of the Union address with, that they try to answer, which is about the state of things.
Yep.
How would you describe the state of the NFLPA right now?
We've never been stronger. And I think that the combination of the war that we went through between 2009, 2011, we made some critical changes to a collective bargaining agreement that, a lot of fans may have thought was okay, but wasn't okay with respect to protecting the interest of the player. That was a necessary war, primarily because the owners brought it to us. But, and that deal changed a lot of things. But one of the most important changes was, up until that point, the league had the unfettered unilateral right to increase the player's work up to 21 games.
Wow.
So you and I, we can tell old stories, but, we're probably slightly on the edge of, when there was a 12-game season in the National Football League, then there was a 14-game season in the National Football League, then there was a 16-game season. Most fans don't realize that the league changed, and increased those games without substantially changing the way players were paid or the amount that they were paid. So, for a union, I define the ethos of a union around its ability to protect its workers when it comes to wages, hours, and working conditions. And being able to increase their hours without having to increase their wages is a problem. So we fixed that. You move forward to 2020, the league bought a 17th game. In economic terms, they bought that game for approximately $1.6 billion. And that was a game they had free in 2011. So we're at a point now where that latest CBA not only, substantially increased the minimum salaries for 72% of our players. That same collective bargaining agreement, provided the players with a tremendous amount of leverage during COVID. And as a result, the owners ate all of the overhead with respect to, what it was necessary to protect our players during a worldwide pandemic. All of our players received 100% of their salary when no one in the world, was receiving 100% of their salary. And as far as our joint mission, successfully getting through a season, we did it. So, Dave, we're at a time when I know that, we have a level of concussion protocols that didn't exist when I took the job. We've secured pensions for 3, 6, somewhere between 9 and 12 generations of players, where most Americans are saying goodbye to their pensions.
Right.
And when it comes to health and safety of the players, I know that what we did starting in 2011 by credentialing all the team doctors, having protocols in place for, how players are treated if they get hurt. What's the protocols and the necessary personnel that needs to be on a sideline during a game. And then, you're sitting there watching a Monday night game where a player suffers, a cardiac arrest. And thankfully, the right people were on the sideline, trained in the right protocols, also had the necessary backup protocols. But knowing that the things that we did in 2009 and through 2011 with respect to health and safety, I know that had a direct line impact on saving that young man's life.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about Damar Hamlin later in this interview for sure. But first and foremost, just based on another thing you just said, the 17-game season, I mean, clearly you've heard that some players are not thrilled to have the extra game. What has been the general response, do you feel, from players?
I think, look, we're a democracy. And when we started the process of the 2020 CBA back in 2018, that process was talking to all of our player leaders and coming up with roughly the 15 things, 20 things that the players most wanted. And that was our bargaining position going in. Out of the 15 things that the players wanted, we ended up probably getting 13 of them. The league conditioned all of those things on a 17th game.
Mhm.
And that's the question. I mean, look, if it was up to me, would I prefer to play 10 games a season? Sure. I'm sure that a lot of basketball players who are grinding their way through the playoffs right now wish that they played less than 82 games. But that's the nature of collective bargaining. What was important for me back in 2011 was taking away the owner's unfettered right to increase our games without paying it. So, again, I understand it, and our CBA passed by 67 votes. But that's the way the democracy works. And if those same players who, didn't want to play a 17th game, hey, that's great. I haven't gotten a call from any of those players thanking the union for taking away the unfettered right in 2011. But also the same thing, if you're not happy with the deal that's on the table, what is the role and what is the right of labor? Strike. So the question becomes not really to me about whether somebody likes this deal or not. To me, what this business is, the day after every election in America, 51% of the people hate you. The real issue for collective bargaining isn't how the deal ends up. The real issue for collective bargaining is what is the membership willing to do if the deal that they want is not delivered.
And it's obviously very difficult to organize a strike. I'd love to hear your perspective on it, but when players on average play 3 to 4 years, when they're in that kind of position, doesn't that make organizing labor action more difficult?
It does. And I'm not saying that organizing a strike, would be an easy thing to do. I think organizing a strike would be easier than maintaining a strike because, look, in our history in the National Football League is, depending on how you count, either 2 or 3 failed strikes. But the way that I see this is not really a do you strike or do you not strike scenario. It's can you successfully win a strike or not win a strike? And that is both a question of reality and a question of perception. Do the owners believe that that the players will strike? No. Do the players believe that they will strike? No. So, right. And so, you and I are big fans of Saul Alinsky. The way that I measure our wherewithal to successfully win a strike, despite what players say or despite what other people say, I think organizing a strike, frankly, is fairly easy. I do. Because our player reps are smart, our executive committee is smart. I think you could make the case for a strike, and I think that they could vote yes, as player reps and executive committees have voted yes in the past. The problem wasn't that they voted yes. The problem was a lot of the players, especially the star players, didn't honor that yes. So, for any fan of Saul Alinsky, you realize that, yes, there are people who are economically constrained, whether it is their situation or the lack of bargaining power. But, the beauty of Alinsky's way of thinking was, are there things we can do less than strike? Sure. And so, we have mini camp, most mini camps are in process over the next, few weeks. We still have 90% of NFL players showing up at OTAs for free.
Mm.
So if you and I, were able to bring Saul Alinsky here and put him in his chair, the first thing he would probably say, well, maybe the players should, deprive the owners of their talent, especially if they are giving that talent and work away for free.
Right.
We can't get players to not go to OTAs for free. Every player, in social media, if you pulled it up on your phone, their social media is covered with what? Team marks. None of them are getting paid for it.
Mm.
So the teams are
Wow.
getting free advertising from a group of people who are populating their social media with free stuff. And by the way, I don't care about that. But if we really wanted to demonstrate solidarity or do something that increased the pressure on ownership to change that perception that the players won't strike,
Mm-hmm.
it's a relatively easy lift.
Mm-hmm.
Don't work for free. Don't publicize the owners for free. And those things are the things that traditional unions, and I think thankfully we were talking outside, things that you've seen other unions in America start to do effectively well. I mean, the most recent one, obviously, the writer strike that we're supporting. You're seeing Starbucks workers who are working for minimum wage and working less than 20 hours a week go on picket lines. You've seen teachers who are living paycheck to paycheck, nurses who are working paycheck to paycheck, walk off the job
Mm-hmm.
and shut down school during a school year. You're seeing both physicians and nurses in Great Britain
Mm-hmm.
who realize now that they cannot make a living wage going on strike. So, what's what what paradigm would you want? Would you want a paradigm where the minimum salary is $800,000 a year, but you work for an average of 3 years and make a decision not about striking? Or would you rather be in a paradigm where people are making less than $60,000 a year and living paycheck to paycheck and making a decision about whether they want to go on strike? At the end of the day, it's not an issue of economics. The economics are an excuse. It's an issue of will.
Mm-hmm. I can't even begin to talk about the amount of issues you've had to deal with over the last 14 years.
Yeah.
I mean, compare that to any 14-year period in the history of the National Football League. It's not even close.
It's not even close.
No, the word is maelstrom is the one I keep coming back to. And one of the issues that's been so intense over the last decade and a half has been the issue of racism.
Yeah.
And the way it's been discussed openly in the league, unlike ever before. What do you say to fans who look at the National Football League, they look at the coaching circles, they look at who's in the owner's box, and they believe that the league is afflicted with structural racism? What do you say to those fans?
It's true. I mean, I think that you could, use, and if we were splitting hairs, I think that it's both institutional and structural. Institutional in the sense that it is historical and perpetual. Structural in the sense that we have a closed system in the National Football League. The structure is a closed system.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say to those same fans who feel, and rightly feel, that the league is engaged in structural and institutional racism, what I would say to the fans is, welcome to the National Football League. And the reason why I say it that way is, even your question inherently contained the answer. they are still fans, aren't they?
Yeah.
And so, I have a hard time if, a fan comes up to me and says, D, what are we going to do about, the racism in the National Football League? And, depending on whether it's my first tequila or my third tequila, the eloquence of the answer. But the first thing that I remind them of is you're still a fan, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
You watch, you buy your ticket. So are you supporting this structural and institutional racism?
Mm.
Yes.
Did
Yes.
has your thinking on this evolved since 2009, or do you feel like you walked in sort of knowing the score?
I'm a student. We're both students of history.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you want to go back and, you have an opportunity to ask Drew Brees or Mike Vrabel or Brian Dawkins or Jeff Saturday or Foxworth, any of those guys who were on the executive committee when I got elected, they'd probably roll their eyes about what my interview process was. My interview process was primarily teaching them what the National Football League really was.
Mm-hmm.
So, I got a call about this job. I wasn't looking for this job. When the call happened, the first thing I did was spent, probably 3 weeks just doing a deep dive on what the history and structure of the National Football League is. And, when you do that, there is an inescapable conclusion that you reach if you're willing to purely indulge the sort of the scientific analysis of the league. First of all, stop calling it a game and understand why, the NFL majority shareholders. I mean, think about it. I mean, I'm coming to this job as a partner in, a large law firm, former, homicide prosecutor. I'm looking at it just from a pure, almost clinical analysis of what the business is. Well, I mean, there's the head of, Lazard, or there's the head of Goldman Sachs, and there's the head of Google, and there's the head of Amazon. Which one of those guys call themselves an owner?
Mm.
I mean,
No,
even the NBA calls themselves governors.
Mm-hmm.
But no, you're the majority shareholder of the Browns, or you're the majority shareholder of the Ravens, or you're the majority shareholder of the Commanders. I mean, just so fans understand, I mean, there are multiple owners, people who have invested in this team. Who calls themselves owners?
Yeah.
So
I think people who have certain attitudes about their workers /
and
players.
people who want to remind people of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not just an internal mindset. All of this is performative, right? So, it when I'm interviewing with the executive committee, I told them, I don't think of any of this like the game. Mm-hmm. They've indicated that they're going to lock you out. That means something pretty simple in labor world. Mm-hmm. A lockout isn't a negotiation. A lockout is just an effort to step on your neck and choke you out until you take a deal that sucks. That's a lockout. Yeah. So if a team or if any manager or any business decides to engage in a lockout, know that the deal on the table is an unfair deal. Because you would bargain over a fair deal. Mm-hmm. So, this idea of, that the league was structured in such a way, think about it. There are no 10Ks. There are no 10Qs. There is no public board of directors. There is no Department of Justice oversight. There is no SEC oversight. Nobody delivers an annual report. There is no shareholders meeting. There's nothing in the National Football League that anyone would call a compliance or an accountability structure. So, I know it'd be hard for you and I to imagine, but if you and I were multi-billionaires and we were unfettered with a moral compass, and we had no accountability, no compliance system, what would we do?
By Twitter?
Buy Twitter.
Yeah.
And then run it
into the ground.
Right. So, this question of institutional and structural racism, whether you are looking at issues of race or gender or class, this is a closed system.
Mhm.
I mean, John Mackey filed the first lawsuit for free agency in 1971. We didn't get free agency until 1993. I have shoes older than 1993. And so what I try to remind people of, this is a closed system where 32 people do whatever they want to do.
Mhm.
So this idea that fans should be shocked at the structural and institutional racism, yes, but also it means you don't understand what the National Football League is.
Now, yeah, great point. Another issue in your tenure that certainly brought a lot of what we've been discussing to the surface was, of course, Colin Kaepernick.
Right.
No need to explain background on that.
No.
What are your thoughts on Colin Kaepernick, the person? And I know the union reached out to offer support.
We actually represented him.
Okay, tell me a little bit about the intersection between Colin Kaepernick's protest and the NFLPA.
The third thing I would add is just the overall process or what was going on in the country at the time. Because,
Sure.
You and I know that's
critical for understanding everything.
Critical for understanding everything.
Yeah.
So let's one giant step back. I'll never forget. I'll never forget two things. I don't watch a lot of football. And I certainly don't watch any preseason football. But I remember when I got a call from our head of communications that Colin Kaepernick had knelt during a preseason game. And, I remember that like it was yesterday. And George said, I agree with you, D. We need to say something. And if you remember, the first sort of public person to come out and support his right to kneel was me and us. The first interview I gave was to Dave Zirin.
Right.
And I that was a deliberate decision because there are only a few people that I could talk to who understood and would be willing to talk about how that act was framed against both the history of the NFL, the history of protest, and the battle that has never really gone away in America, but certainly a battle that was far more joined over the issue of racism in our country. And so, from that moment forward, we felt that it was important not to only defend Colin. I looked at it as our role of defending speech and defending our right as a group of players to be something more than a two-dimensional, fungible, discardable object. And again, my frame, it happens on the sideline. It's not during the game. It doesn't impact any part of the game. It doesn't deprive, I'm just D, the CBA lawyer, doesn't deprive the fan of his ticket, doesn't deprive the team of its labor. And it's not a violation of the collective bargaining agreement. Now, realistically, do I also understand that it might not be 100% positive or 100% supported by every other player in the league? Fine. But that's where I feel that, I spend most of my time and sort of at times my highest probably my highest utility is teaching, right? So no, it wasn't popular. But then it became really important to get on the road as quickly as possible, go team to team to team, and basically take this opportunity to teach our membership. This is why the union is taking this position. No, it is not. We are not going to decide by majority vote whether somebody has the right to express themselves, because that is something that is not subject to majority rule. And yes, I heard it. Is this a democracy or not? Yes, but I don't care who votes. No one has the right to vote away your intrinsic rights.
Yeah, seems pretty anti-democratic for people calling for democracy to say people should be silenced.
And it's just like the fans, and yes, it was just like some of the players. The call for democracy was an illegitimate frame for what you really are believing. You're talking about it being democracy, but what you're really saying is, I disagree with what he's doing. I'm going to interpret it as anti-flag, or I'm going to interpret it as anti-police. Why don't we just listen to what he's saying and understand why he's doing it, and come to a conclusion that he's expressing himself over real issues that are plaguing America at the time. And by the way, if you disagree, no one is making you kneel. No one's making you stop the game. And so, from there, obviously, when Colin chose not to exercise his option to stay with the 49ers, went into the market, couldn't get a job. We filed the collusion claim. And he was represented by his lawyers, but also represented by the union. We pursued that case until he settled that case.
Were you glad he settled, or were you hoping it would go to trial so a lot of this could be aired out? You got to have an opinion on that.
I do, but that opinion is also covered by attorney-client privilege.
Okay.
But I do have an opinion. Equally important, if not more importantly, however, than just the case, right? I mean, because look, the collusion case wasn't the first case we brought against the league. It's probably somewhere around the 600th. But what was more important to me at that time was, as other players stepped up to protest, it was about protecting their rights, but also making sure that this union went into overdrive to articulate and explain to the country and to our fans why this is such a reverential, important way of shining light on injustice. And so there was that piece. And you probably saw some of the interviews at times, was also going on shows like ESPN and responding forcefully to what I thought was some of the network's decision to either turn this into spectacle, or to frame this in a way, a binary way, a false binary way, that this is taking away from the game. And players are simply choosing to whether they are going to sacrifice the game or sacrifice or indulge in their way of self-expression. That's a false binary choice. And then, the other level to it, of course, is knowing that, virtually every NFL owner had decided that, this was the existential moment for the National Football League. I mean, mind you, we've had owners arrested for, carrying trash bags of drugs. We've had owners with prostitutes. We've had owners, engaged in gambling. We've had owners who were stripped of their teams. None of those were an existential moment for the National Football League. No, the existential moment was a pizza sponsor that was willing to pull out. And, I mean, some people, and in there, okay, they're right. Every now and then I can be a little smart mouth.
Are you about to say it's not very good pizza?
if our biggest economic worry
Mm-hmm.
at the time was whether Papa John's was going to pull out, then Roger, please tell me that we are on the economic brink of collapse
Mm-hmm.
in the National Football League, because I don't understand.
Right.
And so, there was that, what we had to deal with. And then ultimately the league, imposed their unilateral rule, banning kneeling. You're either going to stay in the locker room or come out, and somebody was going to side and somebody wasn't. And we ended up resolving that because for two reasons. One, made it clear that if they didn't withdraw their unilateral rule, we were going to file a federal case, which I believe we would have won. But more importantly, if they persist in this unilateral rule, my message to players would be, kneel at the coin toss, kneel during every timeout, kneel during every touchdown, kneel during every TV timeout.
Mm.
So pick your poison.
Right.
And weirdly, to this day, that standstill agreement where they withdrew their unilateral rule,
Mm-hmm.
that's still in place in the National Football League since then.
Hmm.
We haven't changed anything. The status quo of whether players can kneel, players can, but that's just simply a standstill agreement where both sides decided to put their guns away.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to how the National Football League operates.
Mm. Another moment during your tenure, something you mentioned already, that was so intense and so frightening, was Damar Hamlin's
Yeah.
near death on the field. Now, the report from ESPN was in real time was that the NFL said, you got 5 minutes to get your heads together. Now go back out and play. And they said the union talked to the players along with the coaches, and they were the ones that said no way, and the game was called. The NFL denies this, and I was wondering if you could tell us the truth.
The truth.
Yes.
Watching the Damar Hamlin situation, again, I don't watch a lot of football. My wife and I were watching that game, and after the injury, obviously for people who were watching on TV, you really couldn't see what was going on. But the first thing the two things that alarmed me were the reactions of the players and the length of time. Because I stay mired in what the emergency protocols are for when players get hurt, and whether it's an airway, whether it's a concussion, whether it's a soft tissue injury, whether it's a break. We've contemplated every injury that could possibly happen and what is supposed to happen in a response to that. And the length of time that was going on was the thing that alarmed me the most, because I knew that it was something extremely serious. So, 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes into it, I called Roger, and my feeling at that moment was, we need to call this game. And I don't know what's going on, but I know, looking at the reactions of these players, that it's horrific. And that conversation, let's just say, went on far longer than it should have.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the league's interest in checking with the coaches, and I don't mind telling you that I understand the league's interest in talking to the players. My position was, this is not a coach's call. This is not a player's call.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we are a democracy, but a consensus about whether that game should continue coming from the players. I don't mind telling you, as the head of the union, that I don't believe that that is a player call.
Mm-hmm.
It is a leadership call. It's a morality call. It's an ethical call. It is not a democratic vote call.
Mm-hmm.
And I've made that clear.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to a couple of players in the locker room. We were fortunate enough to have an executive committee member playing
Mm.
that day. I texted him,
Who was
talked to
that
him.
again?
Michael Thomas.
That's
from
right,
the
Michael
from the
Thomas.
Bengals.
That's
Tremendous. One of our best leaders. One of our
Yeah.
best leaders of all time.
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk about what we talked about, but I told him I just wanted to tell him what my message was to Roger, and then the game was called.
Mm.
So I saw what the league said. That just simply doesn't square with reality.
Got you. So Roger Goodell, you've been working across the table from him for 14 years.
Yeah.
Given everything that's happened over the last 14 years, the intensity, the ups and downs.
We're doing a couple's vacation next week. Sort of just an all-inclusive thing, you know.
Nice.
Yeah, you got to keep the magic alive.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe a cruise. You know,
Not.
Is he fit to serve? I know that's not obviously your call, but
yeah,
I
I mean,
your measure of the man after all this time.
Roger, I think we have a far better working relationship now than we did. And it's going to sound like I'm not defending anyone, but this is just the frame of what this business is. He represents the interest of the owners. I represent the interest of the players. In the same way that it was, Walter Rather against the head of GM or Rich Trumpka against the head of the coal mines. Yeah, those aren't situations that are breeding grounds for friendly relationships. And frankly, I don't think they can be. I don't think that a labor leader whose first thought is how well can they get along with management is starting off in the right place. I mean, just take a look at history. And I hear some of those people, and there's other people in the business who have different relationships. I don't think that is a positive, helpful relationship for your workers. Because peace is negotiated peace. I mean, it's peaceful. It was extremely peaceful when players didn't have free agency. It was extremely peaceful when the league could increase our games from 12 to 16 to 21 games. It's peaceful. Is it a great working relationship? No. So I don't mind comprehending that we might be able to negotiate a peace. But if your members are suffering at the hand of that peace, I think it's rather Pollyanna-ish to think that, someone can have a view of, well, I can talk to them. We're going to get more from honey than vinegar. Hey, I think those are great little sayings. It didn't work for my dad when he was marching for civil rights. Didn't work for my mom when she lived in the Jim Crow South. A lot of people would say it was peaceful. It just depends on which house you're growing up in. So that's the backdrop of how Roger and I met. And it was his first CBA. Paul Tagliabue's out. The owners made a decision even before we got to the bargaining table that it was going to be a war. And I think Roger did what sometimes we are told to do by our membership: go to war. Is he fit? Yes. I mean, Roger, we can go at each other. But he's incredibly bright. And I think to some extent, both of us have a very, very difficult job. I'll tell you right now, I wouldn't do his job. I've dealt with the owners for 14 years.
It's so funny that feeds right into my next question, which is you just said you wouldn't take Roger Goodell's job, but if I built you a time machine, So congratulations, I'm giving you a time machine.
Thank you.
Pretty
It's
good.
like, yeah, it's Mr. Peabody and Sherman.
Exactly. We'll star in the reboot. If I the live action version, if I take you back to 2009,
Yeah.
what advice do you give yourself? And
In 2009,
yes,
don't take the job.
and do you take the job? Was
No.
my next question. Wow.
I think the first 18 months in this job were far tougher than I expected. I think that understanding the power of the ownership, their ability to not abide by the rules.
hmm
I come from my background was sort of a strict legal background where, the authority of a federal court, the judgment, coming from a court, the decision of a judge,
You're talking about the rule of law.
the rule of law, the
Yeah.
terms of a contract.
hmm
These are a group of people who not only don't believe in that, they don't have to abide by that.
hmm
And a little bit, not as far as I'm going to go about it personally, but they are also unbridled in their ability to destroy individuals.
Have you ever felt targeted?
Yes. I mean, this is what they do.
Mm-hmm.
But, this is, for our historical frame of reference, right? I mean, whether the issue's civil rights or gender rights or labor rights, you can look across history at those civil rights leaders or those, people who were fighting for equality with respect to gender, or those labor leaders, who were fighting for fairness for families. Find me an instance where they weren't personally targeted.
Mm. No, that's right.
The only
That's right.
difference is this is a multi-billion-dollar industry that has no compliance or accountability structure from the outside.
Mm.
So
You tell yourself that in 2009.
I would, yeah. I mean, there was certainly an intellectual understanding of that. There wasn't a practical, emotional comprehension of that.
Gotcha.
And coming into this job where, unfortunately, Gene Upshaw had already passed away, so I didn't have someone in the chair who would at least be there to say,
Mm.
you're on the right track, you're on the wrong track. It's okay to feel these things. It's okay to understand that you feel like you're free falling. I mean, think about it. We had to engage in a strategy. One of our foremost strategies to protect the union was decertifying the union.
hmm
So you get elected in 2009 to head up the NFL Players Association. In March of 2011, the smart legal strategy was to dissolve that same union.
Mm.
And intellectually, you can convince yourself that, yes, this is the thing to do.
Mm.
But you're sitting in a room with a piece of paper and it has your name at the bottom of it, dissolving the union that Ed Garvey and Gene Upshaw built. And if you have an ounce of empathy, that is a sobering moment. And you're by yourself.
Mm.
So, the first 18 months, what I would have told myself in 2009, knowing what I know now, would probably advise myself of the step away from the intellectual. You've got that.
hmm
Appreciate the emotional sort of existential impact of what these next 18 months are going to be.
Mm. Do you expect to be able to play the role for your successor?
That's the only reason that I believe in transition.
Mhm.
And I after I got through that, somewhere around 2013 or so, I swore that, this job was okay. We fixed the issues that we needed to fix from the 2006 CBA into the 2011 CBA. And all of that was to set us up for the next CBA in 2020. So, I spent, just as much time, trying to protect our pensions, not playing 18 games for free,
Mhm.
not giving up 20%, shoring up our share of revenue, taking the ability of the owners to take money off the top from us. Um, all of that was a two-step, right?
Mm.
So you needed to fix that in 11, but as much time as I'm spending negotiating the 2011 deal, I'm spending an equal amount of time setting up for where we want to be in 2020,
Mm.
right? And that's the second part of the third step. But then the third step was, if we're able to land a solid 10-year deal in 2020, that does all the things that we wanted to do, or most of the things that we wanted to do, to get to a point, 4 years in, 3 years in, where we successfully transition. Because my job is to prepare that next person, teach that next person. I mean, this job is, this job's hard. And the toughest part about it is there are no parallel, paradigms for this job. And so in 2020, when we signed the deal and I did my last contract in 20 or 21,
Mm.
I told the players in 21, this is my last term.
Mhm.
We need to think about the process to find the next person. This needs to be your process, not D. Smith's process. But know this going into that search. I would consider the 2009 Demaurice Smith unqualified to run this union in 2023.
Wow. What do you think of the crop of candidates?
I don't know who they are.
Okay.
And I don't want to know.
Got you.
When they
Understood.
decide who the finalists are, we'll do it, and the players will decide.
Uh, I love asking you this. I've asked you
Yeah.
this at different points over the years. I think it's fun to root for the union guys. So can you?
You do.
I think it's fun.
You do. I'm not sure everybody thinks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can check to see where my trading card is trending. My mom bought a few last night, so
Who
that's 5 more.
who are some of the players that have been good union
Oh.
people?
It's
You
hard
mentioned
to
Michael Thomas.
Yeah, it's hard to. Well, Michael Thomas is one of those guys who came in as a young member of the executive committee, primarily, filled that role on the field as a defensive back special teams guy. But the reason, I love players like that, those are the guys who are, for the most part, signing successive 1-year, 2-year contracts, right? I mean, that's the core of our union.
Mm.
I know people see the Tom Brady's and the Jalen's and the Lamars and the Mahomes, but 70% of our players are on league minimum contracts. So, you know, as an aside, when you're doing that 2020 deal and you have the ability to raise all of those minimums by 20% with a stroke of a pen, that's what unions are for.
Mhm.
And I want to be surrounded by guys who get that. But there's guys like Michael Thomas. I mean, there's JC Treader, currently is a tremendous leader. Eric Winston was one of the best presidents we've ever had. I can make an argument that other than Kevin Mawai, I don't know of, at least for my tenure, I don't know of 2 presidents who carried so much weight
Mm.
on being a leader of the union. Kevin, I mean, again, think about that guy. I mean, Hall of Famer, center. He wakes up one morning and Gene Upshaw's dead.
Mhm.
So it falls to a group of players who we think of them as Hall of Famers now, but Drew Brees, will be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Brian Dawkins wasn't a Hall of Famer at the time. Jeff Saturday, probably a future Hall of Famer, not a Hall of Famer at the time. Kevin Mawai still playing. And you wake up one morning and a person who has run the union for about as long as you've been alive is gone. And you have to find the next leader, knowing that the owners have already said that we're going to lock you out in 2011 and we have $4 billion to drive your union into the ground. But guys like Richard Sherman have been tremendous leaders. Vincent Jackson was one of the best leaders we've ever had. That crop of quarterbacks.
I think it's so important for people to hear this, what you're saying right now, because unions get so marginalized in the national conversation, beyond marginalized, erased. So when you hear that some of the people who have some of the most cultural capital in the United States, also being proud union people, that's important.
Look,
for people to know.
For think about it, there's a wall, you've been there in my office, there's that wall that abuts my office, and it's, life-size, fatheads of the plaintiffs who chose to sue the National Football League in 2011, right? And the lead plaintiffs were Brady, Brees, and Manning, right? And it was important to have those players be the lead plaintiffs suing on behalf of every player in the National Football League. Why? Because I wanted to stick it to the owners that our top players were solidified around their membership. But I also wanted to erase that legacy of the quarterbacks club from the 80s and the 90s, where a group of quarterbacks, and there's no simple way of saying this, sold their union out.
Decided for themselves that they would be a labor aristocracy.
100%. At the expense of a group of people suing for free agency. So, that bookend of having the star quarterbacks lead that charge, and then one night getting a call on my cell phone, not knowing, who it was, but recognizing that the call was, from somewhere in Texas, and I pick up the phone and it's Von Miller. And Von says, "Hey, I understand you're leading the players into this fight, and we're suing the league for antitrust violations. I would love to be a plaintiff." This is before he's drafted.
Amazing.
And you have to have a conversation with him. Hey, look, I appreciate the help, but you are slated to be the number one pick. And you have to know that these owners may screw you because you've done this. It's the right thing to do. So, where's the union? We're in a good place.
Yeah. So the next time you see Von Miller on the field, just know this.
Those are the guys, right?
Another future Hall of Famer. You've been so patient with your time. I only have a couple more questions.
Dave, I'm here until you say you don't need me anymore. I'm serious.
Well, that's amazing.
I am. Look,
it's appreciated.
There's only, I can only think of a handful of people that I would have this conversation with, and it's because of your empathy, and the fact that you are just such a great storyteller and a student of history. Because if you don't understand where this fits, it's just seriatim, story after story, meaningless, with no thread.
Exactly.
But you know what? This is if you read a book like Parting the Waters, another Baltimore guy, Taylor Branch, right? Those stories are incredible stories, but this struggle is inextricably tied to the civil rights movement. And it's inextricably tied to the labor movement. And it's inextricably tied to historical fights for freedom and fairness, and equality. And if you don't understand the frame of this, you are just blathering on ESPN about third and long, which is why I don't do that anymore, because I found my anger level to and my emotional level to be on the verge of explosion. And so, when I sit down with, a writer, and especially, in the past, writers that I know are good writers, only to have them either, do an interview or result in a piece that is utterly devoid of historical, cultural, labor frame. I find that absolutely maddening. And worse yet, I feel like I have perpetuated a stupid conversation. And I never have a terrible conversation with you for all the reasons we've talked about. So, Dave,
Thank you.
I'm here until you decide.
All right. I got to ask you this, because as we're doing this interview, there's some news came across the wire that you were being thought about for U.S. Labor Secretary if and when Marty Walsh steps down. Is this something? Yes.
Yeah.
Is this anything that you would have interest in? And if not, or if so, what are D. Smith's future plans?
Honored to be considered. The president went in another direction, and that's fine. I'm such a big believer in organized labor and equally, if not more important, the role of the government to protect the labor rights of American citizens. So it was an honor to be considered. What's next? Look, I think that what's next on my plate is, while I'm not involved in the hiring process, to make sure that our players understand the necessity of finishing this process in a very strong way, so that I can then take the next step of teaching and preparing the person, for this next job. I mean, we're in a great position, but look, we're running, unlike 2009, we're running now 2 $1 billion businesses. And that's in my spare time as the executive director. So that's what's next on the horizon. I just wrapped up my second year teaching at Yale at the law school. You would
I saw that.
Man, it was tough at the end because I was juggling my schedule, but next year I want you to be my lead-off speaker. My class this year was leadership, law, and ethics in sport.
Okay.
Leadership.
Right. And what that means.
Well, and it was great because I think the students figured out somewhere around week 4 or 5, hey, wait a minute, this isn't a sports class. We're talking about morality and ethics and leadership. We're just using sport as the trick, the frame. So I'm going to continue to teach in some way, shape, or form. One Team Partners, the business that we built in 2020 is, now valued in excess of $1.6, $1.7 billion. It's a consortium and a private equity company of myself, Tony Clark from MLB, Becca Rue from the U.S. Women's National Team players. We have the rights of the National Women's Soccer League and the MLS players. And we're, we combined our group licensing right because I believe that is the right way to protect players, their name, image, and likeness. I mean, think about it, where we are in college sports now. The leaders in name, image, and likeness was Marvin Miller, who did the first trading card. I mean, you can't.
Marvin Miller, the legendary former head of the Major League Baseball Players Association.
And also, was someone who was so kind to me when I started this job. And I got to meet with Marvin, somewhere between 8 and 10 times before he passed.
Wow.
Also, without a doubt, the scariest person I've ever met in my life.
Scary in terms of intimidation before you sat down with them, or scary once you started talking?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Marvin, I got introduced to Marvin through our good friend and late friend Mike Weiner,
Sure.
who also, became the guy who really taught me what this job was. I came in with a lot of ideas what I thought this job was, but Mike Weiner, and then people like you and certainly Marvin, made me a trade unionist.
Mm.
Made me a trade unionist.
Mhm.
And Marvin, I went up to meet him for the first time, and I was clutching a copy of his book, Whole New Ball Game, and I will never. You have time for this?
Absolutely.
So I go meet him in his apartment in New York. He had recently lost his wife.
Mm.
Sat down and had some tea and have you met Marvin before?
I did an interview with him before he
Just
passed.
one of the most
Yeah.
tremendous people. But Marvin, very slight man,
Yes.
not a big guy. But the moment you meet him, you feel this tremendous force of kind of unbridled passion. Sat down, made me some tea, sat in his living room, and he looked at me and he said, "I'll spare you the expletive, but why in the did you take this job?
Mm.
No sane person would take this job. You
He
have
was,
a
he was
history."
articulating D in 2023, coming back
100%.
in time to talk to you.
And he took me through the history of labor, with the NFL, which I knew, and he was very close to Gene, and he said, this job drove Gene insane. He's fighting for the players on one side, and the players are fighting with him on the other. Do you have any idea why would you give up such a successful partnership and successful business to come do this? And literally, I kid you not, Dave, I'm sitting here like we are, except the book was on this side, and I will never forget just sliding the book behind me. And to this day, I never got Marvin to sign the book because I was terrified.
What did you say when he asked you?
I said, well,
Why do you wanna do
Mr. Miller, I think that I can, fight for the players. There's things that I think I'm qualified to do. And he said, do you really think you're up for this job?
Mm.
And I said, I believe that I am. And he said, you have no idea who these owners are. You have no idea what they are capable of. And then over the next course of the hour, he told me, what he went through. I mean, remember, they labeled Marvin Miller a communist.
Mhm.
I mean, they tried to. I mean, they did a good job of positioning him as a threat to the United States of America.
Mhm.
And he said, this same thing is going to happen to you. And that was the first time going to that first 18 months that I walked out of his apartment, clutching my book without a signature, thinking, okay, what exactly did I get myself into? And I
Mm.
thought I would never meet Marvin again. I mean, that first meeting was so jarringly brutal. And then about 2 weeks later, I get a call at my office, pick up the phone. My secretary says it's Marvin Miller on the phone. I'm like,
Yeah.
am I gonna get yelled at over the phone now? And he called me and he said, when are you coming back?
Oh, wow.
And so I went back about 8, 9 times. And Marvin, I credit Marvin for being that first person to stealing me emotionally for the job. And people always ask, okay, why did you come out of the box so hard? That was because of Marvin.
Mm.
And he told me exactly what this was going to be, and he was 150% right.
Mm.
So the other thing I'll tell you is the last person who wanted to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame was Marvin Miller.
Mhm.
I know, with the baseball players and the union did the things the right thing, but equally, I have no desire.
Mm.
No. So I'm going to teach. If one team partners, continues to excel, I believe that there's a role for looking how to protect and empower European unions, sports unions. I think that would be sort of an interesting thing to do. But the first thing I'm going to do is honor my wife's wishes because I told her that this was only going to be a 3-year job,
Mm-hmm.
and take some time off. And we're empty nesters, and it's
Mm-hmm.
time to make sure that get back to being a good family guy.
Okay. Tough on your kids or amazing for your kids to have you in this job for the last 14 years?
I think it was tough on my kids.
Okay.
I think that, especially for my daughter, I think that this is such a, this sport, at times, and look, I'm happy about certainly the,
Mm-hmm.
where the sport ranks in sort of the ecosystem of America when it comes to entertainment. But what comes along with, every year you're 85 of the top 100 shows, you're 15 of the top 20 shows. I mean, my takeaway from that is people should read more books. Um, what we've reached a point where there is just this never ending, persistent football, football, football. And what comes with that is this is the only business that I know of where every fan has the definitive understanding of what this business is, what D. Smith should be doing, what the union should be doing, what Roger should be doing, what the players should be doing. And again, going back to somewhere where we start, depending on which number of tequila I've had at the bar. I only drink the good stuff.
Yeah.
But you will get fans saying things to you that have no basis in reality. But even when you explain to them, this is why this has no basis in reality, you've been there.
Yeah.
They will fight you to the death. And I think for my kids, look, it comes with the job. But, do they read the things that people say sometimes? Yes.
Mhm.
Does it probably hurt their feelings? Yes. Um, does it make them tougher? Yes.
Mm.
So, nobody likes to wake up, one day with, whatever newspaper it was, John Gruden had something to say about, my wonderful lips. Well, I mean, I would never say anything about somebody, like that, where you are turning them into a caricature, a racist trope.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Roger and I will go after each other, and the owners and I will go after each other. And, but for, I'm sure that they have certain conversations behind closed doors, but um other than, an owner calling me uppity at a meeting once, um uh I find and you know this better than anybody because you're in this business, the tenor and tone of our conversation in America now looks more like 1963 than 2023,
Absolutely.
and sounds more like 1963 or 1953 than 2023. And so I think it's been hard on my kids. I think the either the physical absence or the mental absence that I'm the first one to admit I engage in has been somewhat tough on them. But I also think it's made them tougher.
Mm. Now, you mentioned this in your comments, and this is my last question, really. You are a reader.
Yeah.
What's on the nightstand?
Oh, right now, so I have 2 books. On the nightstand at home is the love stories of W.E.B. Du Bois, which, Dave, might be one of the most beautifully written novels that I have ever read in my life. Debut novel, Her name is Honoree. I can't remember her last name now, but it follows 4 generations of people from the 1700s to just about modern day. I'm trying to think of a novel that I would even make it close to, but um it reminds me of Beloved.
Mm.
It reminds me of The Color Purple. Um, it's one of the most. Oh, and it reminds me of the Grapes of Wrath.
Oh wow. Now,
It is a
I'm
must.
on my phone right now because the Love Songs is in fact by Honoree Fanon Jeffers.
Her debut novel is. It's the most beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read in my life.
Amazing.
So that's my home book.
Yeah.
My travel book is a biography of Woody Guthrie. That was curated by his daughter, which I just find to be amazing. A few years ago, I read is it Poems by Bob Dylan? This book just felt like it was food for the soul for the moment. I mean, I'm in both a obviously, job, but also kind of an emotional transition moment. And I love the idea of reading and connecting with American folk music because it's both past and present, right? I mean, that's the beauty of folk music. It provides context and understanding. And I picked up the front of it, and there was this line from Woody Guthrie, and I think it was folk music is about who's hungry and where's the food at. It's who's hurting and where is the peace. Who's in trouble and where is safety. That's what I'm paraphrasing, but that's what folk music, right? Right. And
Wow.
so reading through, sort of the evolution of his music and folk, folk song storytelling journey has been fascinating.
Amazing. Hey, D. Smith, thanks so much for joining us here
Dave,
on Edge of Sports, man.
Thank you for always being such a thoughtful friend.
Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work. So please tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.